She was a high-stakes auditor used to boardrooms, but now Zafriel was scrubbing wine stains off a $10,000 rug while a Mafia wife laughed. For 90 days, she played the invisible servant, enduring insults and cold tea. But tonight, the maid is attending the gala, and she's bringing the one thing Calderine Rovan can't afford, the truth. Calderine Rovan stood in her champagne beige gown, the undisputed queen of the Rovan Empire, looking down at the woman on her knees. "Wear something black on Saturday, Zafriel," she'd sneered, tossing a $100 bill onto the wet floor. "I want my friends to see what happens when a commoner tries to breathe the same air as us." She had no idea she was talking to the woman who had already frozen her offshore accounts. While Calderine prepared a night of mockery, Zafriel was preparing an execution. The ballroom was set with crystal chandeliers and golden chairs, a stage for the ultimate social slaughter. Calderine expected a humiliated girl in rags. What she got was a silent predator in a $2 million necklace, ready to tear her world apart. Zafriel Ibarra stood outside the towering wrought-iron gates of the Rovan estate, pulling her scratchy polyester collar tight against her neck. To the guards at the gate, she was just another desperate applicant looking for a paycheck. They didn't see the woman who had spent the last decade tracking digital shadows through offshore accounts and shell companies. They didn't see the forensic auditor who could bankrupt a titan with a single keystroke. When the gates buzzed open, Zafriel stepped into a world of manicured hedges and cold stone, leaving her identity as a power player behind. She was met at the service entrance by a woman whose face was a map of exhaustion. "I'm Mrs. Gable," the housekeeper muttered, handing Zafriel a bucket and a heavy ring of keys. "Keep your head down, don't speak unless spoken to, and whatever you do, stay out of Mrs. Rovan's way. She doesn't like clutter, and to her, we are all clutter." Zafriel took the bucket, her fingers grazing the plastic handle, a far cry from the fine leather briefcases she usually carried. Her mission was simple: find the physical trail of the $200 million meant for the Global Children's Relief Fund. Digital records showed the money entered this house, but it never left. By noon, Zafriel was on her knees in the formal dining room, polishing the baseboards of a room that smelled of expensive beeswax and old secrets. The silence was broken by the sharp click of heels on marble. Calderine Rovan entered the room like a storm wrapped in silk. She was draped in a champagne beige gown that flowed behind her, her jaw set in a permanent expression of boredom and disdain. She didn't look at Zafriel's face. She looked only at the floor. Suddenly, Calderine stopped. She pointed a manicured finger at a tiny speck of dust near the leg of a mahogany table. "You," she said, her voice like ice. "Is this what passivity looks like today? I pay for perfection, not for shadows who miss spots." Zafriel didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll fix it immediately." Calderine didn't walk away. Instead, she took a half-full glass of sparkling water and tilted it, watching the liquid splash directly onto the area Zafriel had just finished cleaning. The water soaked into Zafriel's sleeve and pooled on the wood. "Now you have a reason to stay down there a little longer," Calderine remarked, a small, cruel smile touching her lips. "It's important you learn your place early. In this house, you aren't a person. You're just a tool I use until it breaks." As Calderine swept out of the room, Zafriel stared at the water. Her pulse was steady, her mind already recording the layout of the security cameras she had spotted while scrubbing. Calderine thought she was breaking a servant, but she was actually giving a predator exactly what she needed, a reason to look closer. Zafriel reached for her cloth and started to wipe, her eyes fixed on the door. The audit had officially begun. The days at the Rovan estate blurred into a cycle of stinging insults and grueling labor, but Zafriel used every minute to map the enemy's movements. She became a ghost in the hallways, someone so lowly that people spoke freely in front of her. While Calderine was obsessed with social status and shallow cruelty, her husband, Caliph, was a different breed of shadow. He was a man of heavy silences and sharp eyes, moving through his own home like a king wary of a coup. One evening, Zafriel was tasked with cleaning Calith's private study, a room thick with the scent of old leather and expensive tobacco. Caliph sat behind a massive oak desk, his salt and pepper hair caught in the glow of a single lamp. He didn't look up as she entered with her dusting cloth, treating her with a distant, cold professionality that was far better than his wife's active malice. As she polished the bookshelves near his desk, her eyes instinctively darted to a physical ledger left open near a stack of shipping manifests. Her mind, trained to spot financial inconsistencies at a glance, locked onto a set of figures. It was a classic double-entry error, a sloppy mistake that looked like a simple typo but would actually trigger a massive red flag during a federal audit. It was the kind of mistake that could cost a man like Caliph his freedom. Caliph was called away by a sudden phone call, leaving the room for a brief moment. Zafriel knew the risk. She shouldn't exist in his world. But her instinct for order overrode her caution. Taking a small pencil from the desk, she made a tiny, elegant mark next to the incorrect sum and wrote the corrected total in the margin in a script so small it was almost invisible. She was back at the bookshelf, heart hammering against her ribs, when Caliph returned. He sat down, his gaze falling back to the page. The room went deathly silent. Zafriel kept her back to him, rubbing a wooden shelf until her knuckles turned white. "You," Caliph said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that felt like a physical weight. Zafriel turned slowly, her head bowed in the way Calderine demanded. "Yes, sir." Caliph was looking at the ledger, then at her. His brow was furrowed, his eyes scanning her simple uniform as if seeing her for the first time. "This calculation in the margin. Who did this?" "I noticed a small discrepancy while I was dusting the desk, sir," Zafriel said, keeping her voice flat and humble. "I didn't want you to have a headache over it later." Caliph stood up, his broad shoulders blocking out the light. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. He didn't look angry. He looked calculating, his grey eyes searching hers for a slip-up. Most people who work in this house can barely read a grocery list, let alone spot a complex accounting error in a second-hand glance. "I grew up around numbers, sir. They're easier to understand than people," she replied quietly. Caliph studied her for a long beat, the silence stretching until the air felt thin. Finally he spoke, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Numbers don't lie, Zafriel. But people do. Every single day." He turned back to his desk, but his gaze remained on her reflection in the window. He didn't report her, and he didn't tell his wife. For the first time, Zafriel realized that in this house of monsters, the biggest one of all was now watching her with genuine curiosity. The interaction in the study had changed the air in the house. Calitha's silent observation felt like a spotlight, but Zafriel couldn't afford to be distracted by his curiosity. She had a job to do, and the numbers she had seen in the ledger pointed toward a dark, forgotten corner of the estate. While the upper floors were filled with light and expensive art, the basement was a maze of cold stone and heavy shadows. Zafriel waited until the clock struck 2 in the morning. She slipped out of her small servants' quarters, her footsteps silent on the service stairs. She wasn't carrying a mop tonight. She was carrying a small high-tech scanner disguised as a pocket mirror. According to the digital footprints she had tracked before entering the mansion, the blood money from the children's fund wasn't in a digital cloud. It was physical. She reached the heavy oak door of the old wine cellar. Most of the staff avoided this place because of the damp chill and the flickering lights, but Zafriel welcomed the gloom. She moved past rows of dusty bottles until she reached the very back of the room, where the stone wall felt slightly different to the touch. She ran her fingers along the mortar until she felt a slight mechanical catch. With a soft click, a section of the shelving swung inward, revealing not a safe, but a stack of heavy, waterproof shipping crates. Zafriel's heart thudded against her ribs as she pried the lid of the top crate open. It wasn't filled with Calitha's Mafia business. Inside were neat bundles of $100 bills, each wrapped in bands stamped with the seal of the Global Children's Relief Fund. But there was something else, a leather-bound diary tucked between the stacks of cash. Zafriel opened the book and scanned the pages. Her breath hitched. The handwriting was elegant and sharp, the unmistakable script of Calderine Roven. The entries weren't just records. They were a roadmap of betrayal. Calderine hadn't just been stealing from the charity. She had been stealing from her own husband's accounts and making it look like his lieutenants were the thieves. She was draining the Rovan Empire from the inside, planning to disappear once the accounts were dry. A floorboard creaked above her. Zafriel froze, holding her breath until her lungs burned. The sound didn't repeat, but the message was clear. Her time was running out. She used her mirror scanner to take rapid-fire photos of the ledger and the serial numbers on the bills. She had been looking for a way to take down a Mafia boss, but she had found something much more explosive. Calderine wasn't just a cruel socialite. She was a parasite. Zafriel closed the crate and reset the stone wall, a cold, hard fire burning in her chest. The invisible Maid now held the match that would burn Calderine's world to the ground. All she needed now was the right stage to light it. The morning after the discovery in the wine cellar, the air in the Rovan mansion felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Zafriel was back in her uniform, her hands moving mechanically over the silver tea set, while her mind replayed the images of the stolen bundles of cash. She was a hunter now, merely waiting for the right moment to strike. She was summoned to the sun-drenched morning room where Calderine sat with 3 of her closest friends. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sharp, metallic tang of gossip. Calderine looked radiant in a silk wrap, her sharp jawline tight with a predatory excitement. As Zafriel poured the tea, she felt the women's eyes crawling over her like insects. "Oh, look at her," one of the friends whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "She really does look like she was born to hold a tray, doesn't she?" Calderine let out a dry, musical laugh. "She's remarkably efficient. But she lacks spirit. Which is why I've decided to help her." She turned her gaze to Zafriel, her eyes gleaming with a malice that she didn't bother to hide today. "Zafriel, put down the teapot. I have a surprise for you." Zafriel straightened her back, her face a mask of humble confusion. "Yes, ma'am. My husband and I are hosting our 25th anniversary gala this Saturday," Calderine said, leaning forward. "It's the event of the season. The mayor will be there, the governors, the heads of every major bank. And I've decided that you should be there, too. Not as a maid, but as my guest." The other women erupted into high-pitched giggles. Zafriel knew exactly what this was. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was a public execution. Calderine wanted to put Zafriel in a room full of the most powerful people in the city just to watch her drown in her own inadequacy. "I don't have anything to wear to such a place, ma'am," Zafriel said quietly, playing the part of the intimidated servant to perfection. "Don't worry about that," Calderine sneered, tossing a small, crumpled envelope onto the tea table. "There's a little shop on the edge of town that sells used theater costumes and cheap leftovers. Buy yourself something black. It'll make you easy to find when I want to show my guests what true humility looks like. It'll be the highlight of the night, a little live entertainment for people who actually matter." Zafriel picked up the envelope, her fingers steady. She could feel the heat of Calderine's arrogance radiating off her. "I'll make sure I don't disappoint you, ma'am," she said. As she walked away, Zafriel felt a surge of cold, sharp adrenaline. Calderine thought she was setting the stage for a comedy, but she had just handed Zafriel the keys to the courtroom. Zafriel wouldn't be the entertainment. She would be the judge, the jury, and the one who finally closed the books on the Rovan family. The following night, the mansion was buzzing with preparations for the anniversary gala. Zafriel retreated to the shadows of the servants' garden, pulling a small, encrypted burner phone from the waistband of her uniform. She needed to send the photos of the stolen cash and Calderine's diary to her team outside. The signal was weak, and she leaned against a stone pillar, her heart racing as the progress bar ticked upward. That's a very expensive piece of hardware for someone who claims to have grown up around grocery lists. The voice was like gravel hitting a metal plate. Zafriel froze. Standing by the heavy iron gate was Elias, Calitha's head of security. He was a man built like a mountain, with a face full of scars and eyes that had seen too much. He stepped into the moonlight, his hand resting near the holster at his hip. Zafriel didn't try to hide the phone. She knew Elias was too fast and too smart for lies. "I'm just making a call, Elias," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "To a secure server in the city?" Elias asked, walking closer until he towered over her. "I've been watching you, Zafriel. You don't move like a maid. You move like a soldier. Or a spy." He reached out and took the phone from her hand, looking at the screen. His eyes widened as he saw the images of the hidden crates in the wine cellar. Zafriel prepared herself to be dragged to the basement, but Elias didn't shout. He didn't reach for his radio. Instead, he looked toward the mansion windows, where Calderine could be seen laughing and throwing a glass of wine at a young server who hadn't moved fast enough. "She treats us like dogs," Elias whispered, his voice thick with a resentment he usually kept buried. "I've worked for the Rovan family for 20 years. Caliph is a hard man, but he has a code. But her. She's a snake. She's been draining this family's soul while framing good men for her mistakes." He looked back at Zafriel, then handed the phone back to her. "The signal is better near the north wall," he said quietly. "And the security cameras in the ballroom will have a glitch at exactly 10 o'clock on Saturday night. If you're going to do what I think you're going to do, make sure you don't miss. Because if you fail, we both die." Zafriel took the phone, stunned by the sudden alliance. "Why are you helping me?" "Because for the first time in a long time, I want to see the right person win," Elias replied. He gave her a sharp, brief nod and vanished back into the shadows of the patrol route. Zafriel hurried to the north wall, the burner phone glowing in the dark. She wasn't just an auditor anymore. She had an inside man. The trap was finally set. The night before the gala, the Rovan mansion felt like a predator lying in wait. While the other servants slept, Zafriel sat in her small, cramped room, looking at the two worlds laid out before her. On the bed lay the rough, stained maid's uniform she had worn for 90 days, a symbol of the invisibility and insults she had endured. Beside it, hidden in a garment bag delivered secretly by Elias, was her armor for the coming war. She unzipped the bag, and the fabric of the sleek black evening dress seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. It was elegant, sleeveless, and cut with a precision that demanded respect. This wasn't just a dress. It was a statement of power. Zafriel ran her fingers over the cool material, her mind drifting back to the boardrooms she had once commanded. Calderine had told her to find something black to blend into the shadows, but this dress was designed to command the center of the room. Finally, she reached for a small, velvet-lined box. Inside lay the diamond necklace. In the moonlight, the stones sparkled with a cold, blue fire. To a casual observer, it was merely a stunning piece of jewelry. But to Zafriel, it was the final nail in Calderine's coffin. These diamonds were the exact stones purchased through a shell company 6 months ago, the physical manifestation of the stolen charity funds. By wearing them, Zafriel wasn't just showing off wealth. She was wearing the evidence of Calderine's crimes around her neck. She stood before the cracked mirror on her wall, holding the necklace against her throat. The weight of the diamonds felt heavy, like the responsibility she carried for the children who had been robbed. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be the mousy maid scrubbing wine stains. She would be the personification of justice. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. She quickly hid the jewelry box under her pillow. "Who is it?" she whispered. "It's Elias," came the low rumble from the hallway. "The perimeter is clear. Your extraction team is in position 2 blocks from the hotel. Caliph is in his study, and his wife is already celebrating her prank with a bottle of champagne." "Thank you, Elias," Zafriel replied. "Don't thank me yet," he said, his footsteps fading away. "Just make sure that when the lights go out, you're standing where everyone can see you." Zafriel looked back at the black dress. She wasn't afraid of the Mafia boss or the crowd of elites. She was ready. For 3 months, she had been the dust at their feet. Tomorrow, she would be the storm that cleared the air. She closed her eyes, practicing the calm, victorious expression she would wear when the world finally learned her name. The hunt was over. The execution was only hours away. The Riverside Hotel ballroom was a sea of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and the sharp scent of expensive lilies. The city's elite moved through the space like a school of well-groomed sharks, their laughter tinkling against the sound of a live string quartet. At the center of it all stood Calderine Roven, draped in her champagne beige gown, her eyes darting toward the entrance every few minutes. She was waiting for her punchline to arrive. She had already told her friends to keep their cameras ready for the clown in the thrift store rags, who was about to walk through the doors. Caliph stood beside her, his tuxedo impeccable, his expression a mask of bored authority. He looked like a man who had everything under control, unaware that the foundation of his empire had been hollowed out by the woman holding his arm. Suddenly, the massive oak doors at the back of the hall swung open. The quartet didn't stop playing immediately, but the conversation at the nearest tables died instantly. A woman stepped into the light, and it felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. She wasn't wearing a costume. She wasn't wearing a cheap, black polyester dress from a theater shop. Zafriel moved with a slow, predatory grace, her sleeveless black gown fitting her like a second skin. Her natural curls framed a face that held no fear, only a calm, righteous dignity. Around her neck, the diamond necklace caught the light of 1,000 crystals, throwing blue fire across the walls. The silence spread through the room like a physical wave. Guests lowered their glasses, their whispers dying in their throats. They didn't see a maid. They saw a woman who looked more like royalty than anyone in the room. Calderine's laughter froze. She stared at the entrance, her mouth falling open in a raw, ugly mask of disbelief. Her hand, which had been raised to toast her own brilliance, began to tremble violently. As Zafriel's gaze locked onto hers, Calderine's composure shattered. Her grip on her wine glass failed, and the vessel tilted sharply. A burst of deep red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, staining the silken droplets flying onto her beige sleeve. The dramatic burst of red looked like a wound against the white fabric, heightening the chaos of the moment. Calderine didn't even try to clean it. She was paralyzed, her sharp jawline slack, her eyes stretched wide with the realization that the mouse she had spent months torturing had just walked into her world as a lion. Caliph didn't move to help his wife. Instead, he straightened his posture, his brow furrowed as he watched Zafriel approach. He looked intensely focused, his mind finally connecting the dots. The ballroom was no longer a party. It was a stage, and the maid had just taken the lead role. Zafriel didn't wait for the whispers to settle. She walked directly toward the head table, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Calderine was still frozen, her hand hovering over the red wine that continued to soak into the white tablecloth. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that the social order of the city was about to be rewritten. "You look surprised, Calderine," Zafriel said, her voice projecting clearly through the silent ballroom. "Is this not the black dress you told me to wear? Is this not the entertainment you promised your guests?" Calderine finally found her breath, though it came out as a desperate hiss. "Where did you get that? Those diamonds, that dress? You stole them. Caliph, call security. This woman is a thief." Caliph didn't reach for his radio. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the necklace Zafriel wore. He recognized the quality of the stones, but more importantly, he recognized the fearless look in Zafriel's eyes. It was the look of a person who held all the cards. "I didn't steal them, Calderine," Zafriel replied, her voice dropping to a cold, steady tone. "In fact, I'm the only person in this room who knows exactly where they came from. You told your husband that his rivals hijacked the shipment from the Global Children's Relief Fund. You told him the money was gone, lost to the streets." Zafriel reached up and touched the largest diamond at the center of her throat. "But these stones have a very specific history. Every diamond in this necklace was purchased 3 months ago through a shell company called CRV Holdings. Do those initials sound familiar, Calderine?" The color drained from Calderine's face until she was as pale as her beige gown. She tried to speak, but only a dry sob escaped her throat. "I'm an investigative auditor," Zafriel announced to the room, turning so the guests, and their recording phones, could see her clearly. I followed the digital trail of the missing $200 million straight into the Roven wine cellar. These diamonds weren't bought with my salary. They were bought with the blood money you embezzled from starving children and blamed on your husband's enemies. I'm wearing the evidence because I wanted you to see exactly what your greed looks like before it destroys you. Zafriel turned back to Caliph, who looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The serial numbers on the invoice for this necklace match the currency bands in your basement, Caliph. Your wife didn't just mock me. She's been mocking you for years. The ballroom remained deathly silent. The maid was no longer scrubbing the floor. She was standing on top of the world, and the queen of the Roven Empire was finally beneath her feet. The air in the ballroom was so thin it felt as if the guests had forgotten how to breathe. Caliph Roven stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching on the glass shards of the broken wine vessel. He didn't look at the crowd, and he didn't look at Zafriel. His gaze was fixed entirely on Calderine, who was trembling so hard her silk gown hissed against her skin. Is it true? Caliph's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried to the furthest corners of the hall. It was the sound of a man who had built a life on loyalty and was now realizing he had shared his bed with a traitor. Calderine reached out, her fingers stained pink with the spilled wine. Caliph, please. She's a maid. She's a professional liar. I did everything for us, for this family. You didn't do it for us, Caliph interrupted, his voice growing like a distant thunder. You did it for yourself. You stole from a fund meant for children, and you let me believe my own men were the rats. You watched me punish people who were innocent while you sat in the wine cellar counting your piles of cash. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. The guests leaned in, some holding their breath, others recording every second on their phones. Calderine's eyes widened, perhaps hoping for a weapon to end the humiliation, but what he pulled out was far more final. He dropped a thick envelope onto the wine-stained table. I've known there was a leak for weeks, Caliph said, his face a mask of cold, hard stone. I just didn't want to believe it was you. But Zafriel provided the proof I couldn't find. Those are divorce papers, Calderine. They were signed an hour ago. Every account with the Roven name has been frozen. You aren't leaving this room as my wife. You're leaving as a stranger. Calderine looked down at the envelope, her face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She looked at the guests who were now openly laughing and whispering, the same people who had flattered her only minutes before. She looked at Caliph, who stood rigid and unreachable. Finally, she looked at Zafriel. You think you've won? Calderine hissed, her mascara smudging as tears of fury finally broke. You're still just a girl playing dress-up. I'm the girl who closed your books, Zafriel replied quietly, her chin held high. Elias, the head of security, stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. He didn't wait for an order. He took Calderine by the arm, the same arm she had used to toss $100 bill at Zafriel's feet, and began to lead her toward the exit. She screamed, she cursed, and she struggled, but the high society crowd simply parted like the Red Sea, watching in silent judgment as the queen of the estate was dragged into the night. Caliph watched her go. His broad shoulders slumped for only a second before he turned to face the woman in the black dress who had changed everything. The ballroom was still, the only sound the distant siren of the police car waiting for Calderine outside. The city's elite stood frozen, watching the man who once commanded them with fear and the woman who had just commanded them with truth. Caliph turned away from the door where his wife had been taken, his shoulders squaring as he looked at Zafriel. The stern, calculating mask he usually wore had softened into something resembling genuine respect. I spent my life building a wall of glass, Caliph said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. I thought I was protecting a legacy. I didn't realize the person inside with me was the one shattering it from the beginning. He looked at the diamond necklace Zafriel wore, the physical proof of his family's betrayal. Take them. Take it all. The money in the cellar, the jewelry, the accounts she hid. It belongs to the children she stole it from. Zafriel nodded slowly, her calm expression finally giving way to a small, weary smile. The funds are already being transferred, Caliph. My team began the process the moment you handed over those papers. By sunrise, the Global Children's Relief Fund will be whole again. The blood money is finally going where it was always meant to go. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of historic change. Caliph walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. He was no longer the untouchable Mafia boss. He was a man standing at a crossroads. You told me once that numbers don't lie, but people do, he said quietly. You're the only person who came into my home and told me the truth, even when you were on your knees. He looked around the opulent ballroom, at the gold chairs and the crystal chandeliers that suddenly felt like hollow trinkets. I want to change the Rovan name. I want it to stand for something that doesn't need to be hidden in a wine cellar. I have the resources, but I don't have the vision. Stay. Not as a maid, and not as an auditor. Help me turn this empire into something legitimate. Zafriel looked at the man who had been her target for 90 days and saw the potential for a new kind of power, one built on integrity rather than fear. She reached out and shook his hand, a firm professional grip that signaled the start of a new era. We have a lot of work to do, Caliph, she said. As they walked out of the ballroom together, the guests finally began to talk, but Zafriel wasn't listening. She had entered the house as a ghost to find a secret, but she was leaving as a partner to build a future. The invisible auditor had finished her job, and in the ruins of a broken marriage, a new, honest empire was beginning to rise. This story reminds us that your position is never your identity. Whether you're scrubbing floors or sitting in a boardroom, your true value comes from your integrity and how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Calderine lost everything because she mistook wealth for worth, while Zafriel won because she knew that dignity is a suit of armor no one can take away. Never let anyone's narrow perception of you limit your potential. Stay humble in your hustle, stay sharp in your purpose, and remember, the truth always has a way of finding the light. Thank you for watching. If this story reminded you that your character is your true currency, hit like and subscribe for more tales of justice.